They laughed when I couldn't do a single pull-up. They called me soft hands and made bets on how fast I'd quit. The day I cracked that training dummy's arm clean off its socket, the entire platoon went silent. But what they didn't know was why my grip was so strong. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment if you've ever proved someone wrong, and subscribe because this gets wild. I'll never forget the smell of Camp Lejeune on that first morning. Pine trees mixed with diesel fuel, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe fear, maybe possibility. I was 24 years old, standing in formation with 60 other recruits, and my hands were shaking inside brand new gloves that hadn't been broken in yet. Everyone told me the gloves would soften with time, that the stiffness would fade. They had no idea my hands were already anything but soft. My name is Rhea, and if you'd asked anyone in that platoon what they thought of me during week 1, they'd probably say I was unremarkable. Average height, average build, the kind of recruit who blends into the background during roll call. I didn't talk much, didn't make friends. I was there for one reason only, though I couldn't have told you what that reason was back then. I just knew I needed to prove something. To myself, to someone who wasn't there anymore, to hands that had failed me when it mattered most. The physical assessment came on day 2, and that's when I first felt their eyes on me. Pull-ups have always been my weakness. I gripped that bar, felt the cold metal bite into my palms, and managed 3 pathetic reps before my arms gave out. 3. The minimum for women was 10. I dropped to the ground and felt the weight of judgment before I even looked up. That's when I first heard him laugh. Brock, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been born in a recruiting poster, square jaw, perfect posture, the kind of natural athletic ability that makes everything look easy. He wasn't laughing at me specifically, not yet, but I heard him whisper to his buddies, just loud enough for me to catch it, and they wonder why standards are dropping. His sidekick Trent was worse, loud where Brock was calculated, the type who needed an audience for his cruelty, and then there was Wade. The quiet one who never smiled, who watched everything with these cold, measuring eyes like he was cataloging your weaknesses for later use. The 3 of them formed this toxic triangle that would define my next few weeks, though I didn't know it yet. I just knew that when they looked at me, they saw something less than, something that didn't belong. But here's what they didn't see: the calluses hidden beneath my gloves, worn into my palms over 2 years of obsessive training. They didn't see the hours I'd spent hanging from barn rafters on my family's ranch in Wyoming until my forearms screamed. They didn't see me crushing stress balls into pulp, squeezing until the foam burst between my fingers like overripe fruit. They couldn't know that every single day for 2 years, I'd woken up and done the same ritual, grip training until my hands bled, because I believed, truly believed, that if I'd just been stronger 2 years ago, my little brother would still be walking. What Brock and Trent and Wade saw was a woman who couldn't do pull-ups. What they didn't see was someone who'd held 160 pounds of dead weight, suspended over a 60-foot drop for 4 minutes straight, while her brother's blood dripped onto her face from where his head had cracked against the rock. They saw soft hands. I saw hands that had murdered my brother through weakness, hands I'd spent 2 years trying to rebuild into something worthy of forgiveness. The irony is, I was stronger than any of them. I just didn't know it yet, and neither did they. The nickname started during week 1, casual and almost friendly at first. Office hands. Brock called me during hand-to-hand combat drills. He said it with this grin, like it was a joke we were all in on together. Except I wasn't laughing, and neither was anyone else. They were just watching to see how I'd react. I didn't. I kept my face neutral, my mouth shut, because I'd learned a long time ago that responding to bullies only feeds them. But inside, something twisted. Office hands, like I'd spent my life filing papers instead of hauling 100-pound hay bales before breakfast. Trent picked it up immediately because of course he did. During chow, he'd make a big show of opening his water bottle and asking if I needed help with mine, if my delicate office hands could manage the cap. A few recruits laughed, most just looked uncomfortable and stared at their trays. There was one woman, Ivy, who sat down next to me once and tried to start a conversation, but I shut her down cold. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to, honestly, I still didn't know what I was there for. To punish myself, maybe. To build hands strong enough that they'd never fail anyone again. Week 2 brought the grip strength testing, and that's when everything shifted from annoying to unbearable. The entire platoon gathered in the gym, this buzzing energy of competition in the air. The hand dynamometer sat on a table like some kind of throne, and one by one, the guys stepped up to prove themselves. Brock went first, naturally, squeezing that thing until his forearm veins popped like cables under his skin. 145 pounds. He flexed for the watching crowd, and I swear half the platoon whooped like he'd just won the Super Bowl. Trent managed 132 and acted like he'd split the atom. Wade, quiet, creepy Wade, squeezed out 138 with zero expression, then stared directly at me while he did it. A challenge. A threat. I don't know. Then it was my turn. I felt every single eye in that room lock onto me as I stepped forward. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, taste copper on my tongue. I gripped the dynamometer, felt the cold metal against my palm, and squeezed. Not my hardest. I had this mental block, this wall in my head that slammed down whenever people were watching. The number flashed, 118 pounds. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then Brock erupted. "My little sister has a stronger grip than you?" The gym exploded with laughter, this wave of sound that crashed over me and left me drowning. Someone whistled. Someone else made a comment about opening pickle jars, but it was the new nickname that stuck, the one Trent shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. Soft hands. Soft hands. Like my calluses didn't exist. Like the 2 years I'd spent destroying myself in training were invisible. Like I was made of something breakable instead of something that had already been broken and poorly reassembled. By week 3, the mockery wasn't just coming from Brock's circle anymore. It had spread like infection through the whole platoon. Even guys who'd never spoken to me felt comfortable making jokes about my grip strength during drills. Wade stepped on my hand during rope climbing, accidentally, with his full 200 pounds, grinding my knuckles into the dirt while maintaining eye contact. At mess hall, Brock loudly speculated about how I'd managed to throw a grenade or handle weapons in combat with my condition. I stopped eating with the others, started keeping my hands in my pockets whenever possible, and every night, alone in my bunk, I'd squeeze my fists until my nails drew blood from my palms, whispering the same question over and over: why can't you just be strong when it matters? I still didn't have an answer. The field training exercise happened on a Tuesday that started with rain and ended with me wondering if I should just quit. We were running tactical scenarios in full gear, 60 pounds of equipment, rifles, the whole combat loadout, and my team was losing badly. Not because of me, not entirely, but I wasn't helping. Under pressure, with Brock barking orders and the clock running and everyone watching, my hands wouldn't cooperate. Weapons maintenance that should have taken me 2 minutes stretched to 5. My fingers fumbled with the rifle assembly like they belonged to someone else. We lost. Badly. And Brock lost his mind. He came at me in front of the entire platoon, his face red and twisted with rage, and before I could process what was happening, he smacked the rifle out of my hands. The sound of it hitting the dirt was like a gunshot. Everything went quiet except for his voice, which got louder and louder until he was screaming inches from my face. "You're gonna get real Marines killed out there with those useless hands? You think this is a game? You think anyone's gonna trust you covering their back when you can't even hold a weapon?" Spit flecked my cheek. I stood there, frozen, while 60 people watched me get destroyed. Staff Sergeant Reeves pulled Brock away, assigned him extra duty, told everyone to move out. But the damage was carved into everyone's memory, including mine. I was the liability, the weak link, the one with soft hands who'd get someone killed. That night, I locked myself in the barracks bathroom and stared at my hands under the fluorescent lights. They didn't look soft. They looked like what they were, weapons I'd spent 2 years forging and couldn't figure out how to use. That's when the memory came flooding back, the one I'd been running from since the day I signed my enlistment papers. 2 years ago, I was a climbing instructor in the Tetons. My little brother Cole was 17, all gangly limbs and reckless confidence, my favorite climbing partner. We were tackling a route called Devil's Spine, challenging but manageable. I went first, set the anchors, brought him up behind me. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. His anchor failed. I still hear the metallic ping of the bolt shearing, the half-second of silence before he screamed my name. I caught him. One hand, his wrist in my grip, his entire body weight, 160 pounds, suspended over a 60-foot drop onto rocks that would have killed him instantly. I held on. 4 minutes. 240 seconds while I screamed for help, while my shoulder burned and my fingers cramped and his blood from a gash on his forehead dripped onto my face, into my mouth. I held on with everything I had. But I felt him slipping. Felt his wrist rotating in my grip, millimeter by millimeter, his skin slick with sweat and blood. I squeezed harder, dug my nails in until I drew more blood, but physics doesn't care about desperation. His hand slid through mine like water, and he fell. He survived. Shattered his spine on impact, never walked again. And every single day since, I've lived with the knowledge that if I'd just been stronger, if my grip had just been better, my little brother would still be whole. That's why I joined the Marines. That's why I trained until my hands bled. That's why I couldn't perform under pressure. Because every time someone watched me, every time it mattered, all I could feel was Cole's wrist slipping through my fingers. But that night, staring at my reflection, something shifted. I was done running, done hiding. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, we had hand-to-hand combat training with the weighted dummy we called Bob. He was this reinforced tactical trainer built to withstand thousands of repetitions of joint locks and manipulation techniques without breaking. Brock volunteered first, because Brock always went first, executing a perfect armbar simulation while Staff Sergeant Reeves nodded approval. Trent followed, more aggressive, trying to one-up him. Then Wade, silent and efficient as always. Then Reeves called my name. "Rhea, you're up. Show us those soft hands can do anything useful." Scattered laughter rippled through the group. I heard Trent whisper something to the guy next to him, heard the snickering response. My boots felt like concrete as I walked to the center of the mat, every eye in that platoon burning into my back. I could feel my heartbeat in my skull, each pulse like a hammer. The smell of rubber mats and male sweat was suffocating. Somewhere behind me, someone coughed and it sounded like suppressed laughter. I gripped Bob's wrist. The rubber was warm from the morning sun streaming through the gym windows, slightly tacky against my palm. And just like that, I was back on Devil's Spine. Cole's wrist in my hand, the feeling of him slipping, gone. My vision tunneled. My hand froze on the dummy's arm, completely locked up. More laughter. Louder this time. I knew it. Brock's voice cut through the fog. Soft. Hands. Something in my chest cracked open. Not broke. Opened. Like a dam I'd been holding closed for 2 years suddenly decided it was done. And through that crack came a memory I'd forgotten, or maybe just refused to remember. Cole's voice from his hospital bed 3 days after the fall, his legs useless beneath white sheets, looking at me with those clear eyes. "You didn't let go, Rhea." I slipped. "You held on for 4 minutes. Do you understand how insane that is? You held on. I'd held on. For 4 entire minutes. The failure wasn't my grip. It was never my grip. Every mocking word from the past 3 weeks flooded through me in a single second. Office hands, soft hands. My little sister is stronger. You'll get real Marines killed. Every ounce of rage and grief and suppressed strength I'd been carrying since Cole fell poured into my hand like molten metal filling a mold. I twisted. Not the controlled technique we'd been taught. Pure, unleashed force. Every hour I'd spent hanging from rafters. Every stress ball I'd obliterated. Every moment of obsessive training I'd done to punish myself for a failure that was never mine. All of it channeled into one movement. The crack was so loud it echoed off the gym walls. Bob's arm, reinforced plastic, designed to take hundreds of pounds of pressure, metal brackets and industrial bolts holding it together, splintered. The entire joint assembly ripped free from the torso with a sound like a tree branch snapping. Bolts sheared clean through, the metal bracket bent like aluminum foil. The arm hung in my hand, completely detached, dangling by a few strips of torn rubber. Total silence. I stood there, breathing hard, holding this broken piece of equipment that wasn't supposed to be breakable. Staff Sergeant Reeves's mouth was actually open. Brock's face had gone from smug to shocked to something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. Trent took a step backward. Wade just stared, his usual dead expression cracked by something I'd never seen there before. Respect. "What the hell?" someone whispered. I dropped the arm. It hit the mat with a heavy thud, and for the first time in 2 years I felt my hands were exactly strong enough. Staff Sergeant Reeves called me to his office 20 minutes later, and I walked there expecting to be court-martialed or at least kicked out of training. Instead, he gestured to a chair and asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. "Where did you learn that grip strength?" I almost lied. Almost gave him some story about farm work and genetics, but sitting there in his office, with the broken dummy arm reportedly being examined by maintenance like it was a crime scene, the truth just spilled out. I told him everything. The climbing accident, Cole's spine shattering on impact, the 2 years I'd spent punishing myself, training obsessively, convinced that if I'd just been stronger, my brother would still be walking. The psychological block that slammed down every time someone watched me, every time it mattered, because all I could remember was the feeling of failure. Reeves listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then he told me his own story. Former Army Ranger, lost his best friend to an IED in Kandahar. He was the team leader. He'd chosen the route. For years, he carried that guilt like a boulder on his back, convinced every decision he made would get someone else killed. "Survivor's guilt is a special kind of hell," he said. "Makes you forget that sometimes bad things just happen. That holding on for 4 minutes makes you a hero, not a failure." I'd never thought of it that way. Never let myself. Word spread through the platoon like wildfire, though the story got more dramatic with each retelling. By evening chow, I'd apparently ripped Bob's arm off with my bare hands in a fit of rage. By the next morning, some guys were saying I'd done it one-handed. The looks I got changed. Not all of them. Brock still avoided eye contact, pride keeping him from acknowledging what everyone else had seen. But Trent stopped making jokes. Wade kept his distance, and the random guys who'd joined in the mockery suddenly forgot they'd ever called me soft hands. 3 days later, Reeves announced another grip strength test. Optional, he said, but everyone knew what it really was. A chance for me to prove the dummy incident wasn't a fluke. A chance for them to see if soft hands had really been hiding something all along. This time, I volunteered first. Walked up to that dynamometer like I owned it. And maybe I did. I gripped the metal, and instead of seeing Cole falling, I saw him thriving. Saw him in his wheelchair playing basketball, competing in marathons, living a full life despite everything. Saw him telling me for the 100th time that I'd held on, that I'd saved him, that 4 minutes was forever when you're suspended over death. I channeled everything, every rep, every blister, every moment of training. But more than that, I channeled the truth I'd finally accepted. I hadn't failed. I'd succeeded. And these hands weren't weak. The number flashed, 176 pounds. The previous platoon record was 151. Brock's personal best was 145. I'd shattered both by margins that shouldn't have been possible for someone my size. The gym went silent, then Ivy started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined. Not quite celebration, more like acknowledgement. Recognition that they'd been wrong. That office hands had never existed. That soft was the last thing I'd ever been. Staff Sergeant Reeves just nodded once and wrote my score on the board in red marker, where it stayed for the rest of training. A reminder. A warning. A truth finally told. The final training exercise came 3 weeks later, and fate has a twisted sense of humor because I ended up on the same team as Brock. We hadn't spoken since the dummy incident. He'd go quiet when I entered a room, find somewhere else to be during downtime. Pride is a hell of a thing. It'll let you choke on your own words rather than admit you were wrong. The scenario was a simulated building breach under combat conditions, full gear in the North Carolina heat that felt like drowning in hot soup. Halfway through, Brock went down with a simulated injury, the evaluator's way of testing how teams handle casualties under pressure. He was dead weight, 200 pounds of muscle and equipment and ego, and the clock was running. Someone had to carry him a quarter-mile to the extraction point while the rest of the team secured the perimeter. Everyone looked at each other. Then they looked at me. I didn't hesitate, didn't overthink it. Just moved to Brock, got him positioned, and lifted. His eyes went wide when I hauled him up in a fireman's carry like he weighed nothing. Maybe to my old self he would have been impossible. But I wasn't that person anymore. I'd held my brother suspended over death for 4 minutes. Brock was just heavy. I carried him the entire quarter-mile without stopping, my breath steady, my grip iron-solid on his vest. When we hit the extraction point, mission complete, I set him down carefully and extended my hand to help him up. He stared at it for a long moment, that hand he'd called soft, useless, weak, then took it. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. I looked him dead in the eyes. "Yeah, you were. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just acknowledgement. Sometimes that's enough." Graduation day from combat training felt surreal, like I'd lived 3 lifetimes in the span of weeks. When Staff Sergeant Reeves called my name for the Outstanding Graduate Award, I walked across that platform in a daze. But then he handed me something unexpected. Bob's broken arm, detached and mounted on a wooden plaque with an engraved plate. "Never underestimate soft hands." "This is a reminder," Reeves said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Strength isn't always visible. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones carrying weight nobody else can see." The platoon applauded, genuine this time. Even Brock clapped, though it clearly killed him. But I barely heard any of it because I'd spotted someone in the audience, wheelchair in the front row wearing my favorite hoodie, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Cole. After the ceremony, I ran to him, nearly knocked him over hugging him so hard. "You were always strong enough, Rhea," he whispered. "I've been trying to tell you that for 2 years." And finally, I believed him. Because strength wasn't about holding on forever. It was about knowing when to let go, of guilt, of fear, of the version of yourself that no longer served you. I'd been gripping my failure so tightly I couldn't see I'd actually succeeded. 4 minutes. I'd held on for 4 minutes. That wasn't weakness. That was everything. Staff Sergeant Reeves approached before we left, shook my hand with that knowing look. "Orders came through. You're heading to combat instructor school, hand-to-hand specialization. They need people who understand that real strength comes from surviving the worst and choosing to keep going." I looked at the broken arm in my other hand, then at Cole beaming up at me, then at the platoon filtering out. Some nodding respect as they passed, Ivy giving me a genuine smile, even Wade offering the slightest acknowledgement. This was redemption, not revenge. Something better. That broken training dummy arm? Staff Sergeant Reeves mounted it in the gym with a plaque. "Never underestimate soft hands." Brock washed out a month later. Turns out physical strength without character means nothing. Me? I'm now training other Marines in grip fighting and close quarters combat. And every time a recruit gets mocked, gets called weak, gets told they don't belong, I show them that arm, because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've already survived their worst day. If this story hit home, smash that like button. Tell me in the comments about a time you proved someone wrong. I read every single one. Subscribe for more stories about underdogs who became warriors. And remember, soft hands can still break the things that try to break them.